Welcome back. Welcome back. First, I want to say thank you for the robust discussion and Q&A earlier today. It had no choice but to be robust based on all the information we received, but thank you for being participatory so very, very much. So I just want to briefly introduce our musician for the afternoon, Miss Patricia Lacy. So I'm not going to read her bio. I call her Miss Patty, and I call her Miss Patty because we used to frequent, well, she probably still does, the Golden Time Cafe on the corner of Selby and Milton. And I used to live in the apartment above the cafe, and I'd come down and Miss Patty would be there. And so everybody said, you need to meet Miss Patty, you need to meet Miss Patty. I said, okay. So I was working elsewhere, and they asked for us to get somebody to come and sing from Sounds of Blackness. Well, guess who showed up? Miss Patty showed up. So that's how I know her best. And I call her friend. We don't see each other a lot, but I call her friend because when I saw her, she said, hey, girl. I said, hey, girl. So we got her. But Patty Lacy has been singing all her life as a member of the Minnesota Gospel Twins. She sang weekly on Your Church of the Air on KSTP for 25 years and on the Prairie Home Companion Show on Minnesota Public Radio for 8 years. She is a 27-year veteran of the Grammy Award-winning Sounds of Blackness. As well as one of the 5 backup vocalists for the late, great Luther Vandross. Yes. And she also has sung, she's the anthem, known as the anthem singer for the Minnesota Twins and for the St. Paul Saints games. So please join me in welcoming Miss Patricia Patty Lacy.
You can also see me in the movie 20 Feet from Stardom, which also won an Oscar. I'll always have you when there's no one else, because you saved me. You did what no one would ever do. You died for me and gave your life for me. I will forever be grateful for everything that you done for me. So thankful. Thank you for loving me. You pulled me out of my darkest nights. You told me there will be brighter days again. I could have never made this journey, Lord, without you by my side. I'll always have you when there's no one else. Ooh, you saved me. You did what no one would ever do. You died for me and gave your life for me. I will forever be grateful for everything that you done for me. So thankful. Thank you for loving me. When I reached my lowest lows, you were never far away. And when I couldn't see the road, Lord, you brightened up my day. And when I thought I couldn't go on, Lord, you cared 'cause I'll always have you when there's no one else. Oh, you saved me. You did what no one would ever do. You died for me and gave your life for me. I will forever be grateful for everything that you've done for me. Oh, so thankful. Thank you for loving me. Lord, I want to thank you for all that you've done for me. Lord, I want to thank you for how you set me free. Lord, I want to thank you for the time when I couldn't find my way, 'cause I'll always have you when there's no one else. Oh, you saved me. You did what no one would ever do. You died for me and gave your life for me. I will forever be grateful for everything that you've done for me. Oh, thankful. Thank you for loving me.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's good to have you. From this point out, I don't anticipate any circumstances for which I will need to stall. Okay? So, I won't be racking my brain trying to find a quirky joke that will land well and make all of you laugh, except for one. I have two teenage daughters. Whenever they ask me about whatever social ill is in the world, why is the world like this? My answer is almost always patriarchy. And they say, Dad, that can't be the reason for everything that's wrong in the world. And I say, baby girl, it actually is. I'm sorry. I'm doing my part to change that, but I'm part of the problem. A few weeks ago, you ever, if you're a parent in this room, you ever have those moments where you know that your lessons are landing with your children? I had one of those moments a few weeks ago when my 13-year-old daughter came up to me and she said, Dad, do you know why Pop-Tarts exist, but Mom-Tarts don't exist? And I say, you gonna tell me? Pastryarchy. Thank you. Thank you. Yep. That's a 13-year-old girl doing 45-year-old dad jokes. I have never been more proud. Well, hopefully you all enjoyed some compelling conversation around our lunch tables. I had the distinct honor to share a table with our next three guests. Our next three guests who are going to come and share stories, reflections, and response to what we heard this morning. The reality that two-thirds of the white people we share our Sunday morning spaces with actually don't even follow Jesus. I know Dr. Emerson said his his editor wouldn't allow him to say that they are not Christian, but I don't have an editor. Those that follow a religion of whiteness, as 2/3 of practicing white Christians do, they are not Christian. They don't follow Jesus. They have removed Jesus from the cross, and they have nailed whiteness to the cross, and they worship a deified whiteness. Our next three guests have spent their professional lives navigating these institutions of religion that are overwhelmingly white. And they've navigated these institutions as clergy and laity of color. And I thought, it might be interesting to hear what they have to say about all this foolishness and nonsense. All three of these guests are such dear friends of mine who I have shared laughter, joy, tears, and heartache with through years. I have had the distinct pleasure to hear all three of their prophetic voices from classrooms, pulpits, and streets. I'm just going to say it. All three of these people have their badass credentials. They've got their street cred. They're all listed in our program with their bios. I'm just going to, since I know all three of them personally, select just a handful. You know, I already got like 7 bottles of water right here in the front row for them, but that's... Reverend Dr. Kelly Sherman-Conroy, and I emphasize that doctor because that's a very new title for her. Reverend Dr. Kelly Sherman-Conroy, or Mato Washte Wian, is her Lakota name. She's a member of the Ogallala Sioux tribe coming out of Pine Ridge, South Dakota. She is a professor at Augsburg University. She is the first Native woman theologian in the ELCA church. I know. She's still younger than me, so she has to look up to me as an elder, so stay in your lane, kid. I'm kidding, okay? Like, she's a rock star, all right? I'm just so incredibly blessed to be counted as her friend. Kelly has worked tirelessly for years and years to try to decolonize Christianity, to try to de-whiteness Christianity, to bring her own indigenous Lakota perspective into how we read scriptures and how we talk about God. And going to invite her forward to come and grab a seat on the platform. I'm going to introduce now all of our panelists, and then they're going to pop up individually and offer their comments and responses. So would you please welcome Reverend Dr. Kelly Sherman-Conroy. Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis. Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis preached the most amazing sermon I have ever heard in my life. Unfortunately, It was on a street corner the evening that Dante Wright was shot and killed as an unarmed black man by the police. When I say that all three of our guests today have their street cred, I am not kidding. I have shared space with DeWayne as chaos was erupting all around us. And I've shared that space with him on more than one occasion. I've shared drinks with him. I've shared dinner with him, shared laughter. And we've shared space as we just looked at each other inside and said, why? Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis is the lead minister at Plymouth Congregational Church, just a short distance from here in Minneapolis. He grew up in a good Black Pentecostal church. It occasionally comes out sometimes when you talk to him. I was making fun of him because as we were sitting around our lunch table, he says, you know, we're just here talking about God. And I said, boy, you can take the man out of the South, but you can't take that black preacher out of it. We're just here talking about God. It is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome to the stage Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis. Felecia Boone has a day job. Good for you. She is a DEI consultant for Hennepin County. Does that work with passion, frustration. Felecia is also the vice president of the Minneapolis Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. She does that work with passion and frustration sometimes as well, too. Let's just keep it real. Felecia is an incredible person. I've also shared space with her in churches, sanctuaries, in the streets. Felecia helped organize and lead efforts. She's a member of Calvary Lutheran Church, just a block south from George Floyd Square, and helped organize her church to lead efforts to be a frontline presence as the world around them was crumbling down. They don't come much better than Felecia. So will you please welcome Felecia Boone.
Hello. All right. Oh, wait, hold on just a second. Jim Bear gave me some water. I need more. Thank you. Okay. Water is life. So, as I was sitting and, okay. I'm going to do it a little bit because I move when I talk. I can't help it. This is the first time the microphone is actually at my height. So as Jim Bear said, I started teaching this year at Augsburg University, and I teach American Indian, what do I teach? Religion and philosophical thought. And what I'm learning as I have been going through this process with my students, which is absolutely amazing. My class is, we have 2 young adults who are white. Otherwise, the rest of my class are all youth of culture, which is absolutely amazing. And it has really taught me a lot this year. And so as I was sitting and listening to the presentation this morning, I couldn't help but be reminded of a couple of stories. So if you do know me, you will know that I teach through story, because that is just how I grew up. And stories are powerful. That's how Christ teaches us, right? Christ teaches us through story. We are a people of story, and that's important. And so I have a story. I have a couple of stories I'm going to share. And the first one is about, so I beautifully got to sit on this committee to create the Week of Christian Unity for 2023. And one of the tasks that I had on hand was to create the liturgy. So this is something that is used all around the world. And I think we met for about almost a year and a half, right? And we got to talking about, well, what do we focus on when we're creating this liturgy, and what is kind of our main thing? And I remember Jim Bear had us, or we were meeting up down at the boundary, or not the boundary waters, where were we? Those waters down there. Thank you, Bedote. And I remember sitting there, and we were sitting on the banks of the river, and we were sharing stories, and we were talking, and it hit me that the place that I was sitting, right, the place that I was sitting was the exact place of where my 3 times great-grandmother was imprisoned. So she was a part of the Santee Dakota people, and she was imprisoned because people didn't take the time to understand who she was, who her people were, how we saw the world, how we believed, how we saw God in the world, right? That our knowledge and who we are were scary. And you know, and I was sitting there, and we're talking about this liturgy, and we're talking about all of this work, and I remembered how I grew up understanding water. And this is wisdom that passed down through the generations. And you see, as Christians, when we see water, right, we know that God created the earth, right? We know that most of the earth is water. We know that we as humans are water, right? And that, you know, water is truly life, that water has memory. Scientifically proven, by the way. But water has memory. And I remember sitting there and I was thinking, well, yeah, water has memory, because God is this most amazing creator, because God created us in a way that connects us to water, right? Because when we are in our mother's womb, we're in our mother's womb for 9 months, and we are building this relationship with water. Now, you see, the thing about water is water holds that memory, so it holds the stories. It holds these stories of people, of the world, of all these things that have been experienced, right? And so when we're in our mother's womb, those stories, as we are being created, become a part of who we are. And it's this beautiful thing. And then we're born, and that water, one way or another, flows back out, goes back out into the world. So now your story is a part of the world. That your story becomes a part of the water, that story that it holds. And as Christians, then we become baptized, right? We become baptized, and we go and we're there, and we're celebrating life, right? And we're becoming a part of God's family. But it's more than that, is because we are also having a reunion with that water. So the people that are there, that story of your baptism, that story of your community, all of that goes back into that water again, and we're reunited. And it's just this beauty, right? That water holds just this beautiful connection to the entire world. So we're never really alone, because we carry the stories of each other, of our family. You see, and that was knowledge that I've always known, that is how I grew up seeing the world, right? Or that in Lakota we have the name, if you've been with me on a sacred sites tour with Jim Bear or whatever, is I always have people pick up a rock. right? And see these rocks, as in Lakota, we call it inya, right? And unfortunately, it loses its translation in Lakota or in English, but it's the understanding that that rock is the oldest part of creation. And it has lived through and it carries those stories. And it doesn't matter who you are. That water, those rocks, they're present, right? They're sacred. This isn't just indigenous knowledge. This is knowledge that we carry, we just don't often see, right? Or think about. So we were sitting there and we decided that we were going to use rocks and water in a way throughout the themes of what we wrote, or what we were going to write. And about this time last year, I was invited to go to the World Council of Churches and take our work and sit down with their committee and go over all the things that we wrote. Now, we were mainly all from the Twin Cities because they wanted a perspective of Black and Indigenous people, right? Which has never been done before. And so showed up with two of my colleagues, and we were in Geneva. And I remember sitting in this meeting, and if you know me, I'm a fairly quiet person, sort of, anyway, right? I'm a quiet-spoken person. I can be, unless you've been seeing me in the protest, then I'm not. But, and I remember sitting there, and I'm listening, and they're going through our work, and they're just cutting through it, right? They asked for our voices. So there was the Vatican representatives were running the meeting. There were mostly all Catholic people. This was, part of the one thing that the Catholic people can be a part of, because they're not a part of the World Council of Churches, because they're very massive, right? And I remember sitting there, I'm thinking, you wanted our voice. You wanted our voice, but they started correcting our insight and how we saw the world. And I remember, so I'm like, quietly, I'd raise my hand and I'd say, and I didn't know that there's a way that you're supposed to be talking at the World Council of Churches, and you pick and choose what you're going to say and when. And I just was choosing all the time. And I remember sitting there and thinking, no. Jim Bear wrote this because this is that, and when you change those words, when you change that perspective, you're taking the person out that you've asked to write in their perspective, right? And how they see the world, because we're trying to teach people about Christian unity. And so I remember, and I kept saying these things, and I think they really did get tired of me after the first day, right? And then the second day comes around, and we finally get to the liturgy. And so they're going down this liturgy, and they started pulling it apart. And finally, the guy from the Vatican, he says, well, I need you to explain to me why you're why water? What is your reasoning behind the theology of what you're talking about here, and some of the others, and why rocks, right? So I told him about what I just told you. And he looked at me and he said, in a room full of people, that's great. When we come back from break, we'll figure out how to write it so it's Christian. I sat there. What do you say when like I said, I'm a quiet person. What do you say to, it turns out this gentleman was like, I think they described his position as kind of like what we would have in the Secretary of State of the United States, and just told me that everything I believe in and how I see the world and how I was raised is not Christian. And all of this was, I wanted to slink away, but I wanted to stand up and I wanted to yell. And so I didn't yell, but I chose to speak up. And I said, wait a second. What you just told me is that all of who I am doesn't fit in your definition as a Christian. And he just sat there, and not one person said a thing. In this meeting of all these people from around the world, there was about 20 of us. And I went on to describe how hurtful that was. that the wisdom and the knowledge that I carry, that what I teach my students and what I teach seminarians and what I teach people isn't something scary. You know, and we were just saying earlier, it's like people always say, well, I say I'm a native theologian, and I am because I am native and I'm a theologian. But what I teach is theology, not native theology. I teach God. And that I grew up understanding that God is in and amongst everything. And I remember a couple weeks ago, I'm always telling Jim Bear, it's like we've got to write down the things that we hear. And I was talking about how God is in and amongst everything. That as a native person, I grew up with that understanding. So people always say, well, native people were so connected to the earth. Well, we all are, right? Go back to Genesis. But the biggest understanding was the fact that we understand that the Spirit resides in and amongst everything. The trees, the water, the rocks, the plants, the animals, the bugs, the air. And somebody came up to me and said, so you believe that there are gods in everything? And I was like, no, yo, right? I mean, and it just, people always ask, I think that was one of the questions earlier. That is like, you know, how is this present? Like, how does this whiteness show up this way? The amount of comments of people that mean to do good things, right? Y'all are good people. And when George Floyd died, or was killed, or murdered, excuse me, I remember sitting on this meeting, and we were talking about how, it was just a few days later, and they said, well, how are we going to, as people of faith, how are we going to meet the needs of what's going on? You know, things are burning, people are, you know, getting hurt, and all these things are going on. And they're talking about, well, we've got to send people out. And I went, wait a second. You can't just send anybody out onto the streets, because what are they going to do? They're probably going to cause more harm, right? Some of the most well-intentioned people cause the harm. Like I always say, it's kind of the people that feel like they're woke the most are the ones that cause the most trauma, because they go out into the world trying to fix it their way. And they forget that as all these people, as we saw all these things happening around us, as we became this epicenter of change and voice, not just chaos, that one of the most common questions a church would ask me was, are they Christian? Out of the people when we were caring for them. So in that meeting, I remember sitting, you know, on this Zoom meeting, deciding what to do, and somebody goes, well, Kelly, why don't you just take care of that and figure out. And so I started this Twin Cities Interfaith Movement Chaplains. And I know some of you are here today that were a part of that. And all it was teaching people how to understand how to be kind of a public church, right? How to be church in the world around you, outside the confines of your church, and be present and be a guest, not showing up how to fix. But what does it mean to be a guest in the streets and help to heal the people, not by your presence, so that you're not healing somebody because you just showed up. But the healing is by listening to their stories and hearing their voices. You know, and we would give things away. We would help at churches and places that were helping to bring things into the community, and people, you know, the volunteers would show up that the churches and the places would have, and they'd say, no, you can only have one thing. So you get one of these, and you get one piece of toilet, you get one thing of toilet paper, and you get one of these and that, right? But what we were finding was that people were showing up representing their community. And then these volunteers would argue with the people showing up because, no, I was told you can only have this little bottle of dishwashing soap and one roll of toilet paper. So pretty soon then the churches started saying, can you come and help train the volunteers as well, right? And so the chaplains what they were trained in was just like some honest cultural awareness and just being very intentional about how they are in the world. And yeah, you may know a lot and you're helpful and that was great, but take a step back. One of the last examples that I have about how this shows up in the church was, so about 2016, Standing Rock was happening in this area, right? And this is probably the moment for me that was the most transformative and where I found my voice. Like I said, if you ask my advisor from Luther, she'll tell you I was the one in the corner in the back most of the time because I didn't want to talk. And we showed up with a bunch of Luther seminarians, some students, and we went to Standing Rock. And we were standing. The day came, and over about 500 clergy were there from all over the world. And we marched to the side of the bridge where there were, they had, these big military vehicles and people with machine guns, and they are standing there. And the thought was to kind of give some respite to the protesters who were consistently protesting. And so bringing out all these clergy and these people of faith, and they stand on the front lines to just, even if it's a couple of hours of just breath for those who have been there for days on end, right? And I remember we showed up in the evening and in the middle of the night, and we drove into the camp, and we found a place to pitch our tents. And as you looked around, there were these bright lights up on top of the hills, and they were shining down into the camp, right? So the next morning I get up, and there's this guy on the loudspeaker, and he'd go, "All right, Christians, get your crosses, get your Bibles, get up," and he was the alarm clock for most of it, and so I remember getting up pretty early, and I get out to go walk because I was really curious. And he says, and he's talking, and this woman stops me, and she's this Japanese woman, and we were walking in silence, and pretty soon she said, "I don't know how to take this." And I looked at her, and she said, "My grandmother was a part of the Japanese internment camp that was here in the United States." And she said, "I'm here, but this is what this must have been what that felt like." And I looked up, and where the lights were the night before, you see these huge, monstrous size lights. And next to them were men with machine guns and dogs watching the people below, and consistent airplane or helicopters and things flying, right? But it was a somber moment, and we got to where we were going, and we all prayed, and then we started marching and walking to the bridge, and I was really excited because the elders from my tribe were there. They're Episcopal priests. One of them, he was in his late 80s. He just passed away recently, and it was so beautiful to see him there. And they started praying. And I remember during that time, people kept saying, "Can you speak up?" They kept yelling at him, "I can't hear you." And it got to this point where people behind me were complaining because my elder, who is a very quiet man, people couldn't hear him. So I was getting frustrated. And then we decided to do this great handshake. And maybe you've done this before or not, and you stand in a circle and you shake hands and you keep going, and then eventually you end up shaking everybody's hand. Well, great idea, except for when you have 500 people, it takes like 2 hours. And we were towards the end of it, and finally, so we're standing in our big circle, and we're waiting, and I'm watching people, and they're taking pictures. And these people are taking photos. And I took a few, but pretty soon you see that the circle is coming, right? That the start of the circle, my elders, who is in his late 80s, is walking, right? And he's coming, and he's sharing this moment that is a very sacred thing, sacred act, right? This invitation to a sacred land. The words that they said, the native elders that were there, and they're coming. And they had been doing this for 2 hours at this point, and they almost getting to us. And I remember standing there, and I was like, okay. So the rest of the seminaries, they get in the circle, And this group of pastors from the Twin Cities are taking photos. And I remember saying, it's coming, the circle's coming, you need to get back in line. And one of the pastors, she turned to me and she said, they can either wait or they can go around us because we're taking a group photo. And I didn't know what to say, and I was heartbroken because I don't get that opportunity to have a sacred moment like this. And this woman and these people wanted to take a photo so they could remember that moment, that they missed the most precious moment of all because they didn't get it. They were there to support, but it was more of an allyship because it was more performative, because they made it about them. They weren't standing in solidarity with the people. They made that allyship about them. And so I looked at my elder that was standing there, who's a pastor in the ELCA, a native, and he said, you gotta just let it go. That is how it shows up in the church. That there are these moments that you have that you don't realize just how much that whiteness shows up. That disregard for the people around you, that my story was not important to be told by somebody in the Vatican that how I see the world isn't Christian. But yet I still stand up here and I still teach and I still speak because I think it's important. But I won't be that one to tell you how to do things. I will share my stories, but just as Christ teaches us, the stories have to speak to you, right? That when you are listening to those stories, somebody always says, well, like, how is it that these stories from Native people, like, how do you keep learning from them? So, because just like Christ, these stories, they change every time you hear it because it speaks to you and what you need to hear. God spoke to me and my people as a Native person in the way that we needed to hear it. Think Pentecost. When somebody says, well, oh, no, Native people think in this way. We celebrate Pentecost, right? That God spoke to people in their own language. And that's exactly what God did for us. So my theology is God's theology. And there's nothing wrong with how I see the world. Thank you.
Good afternoon. All right, so I'm going to turn on the timer because, well, you heard I work in government and I was born and raised here. So, where to begin? I think I'll begin with the end. God will swallow up death itself. Evil cannot endure. We will dream and faithfully serve as we wait. We are called to the ministry of justice and reconciliation in our context, and God is calling the church to a reckoning. And then we heard Jim Bear share a quote, and I don't remember the name of the individual, but stop sitting hospice and just attend the funeral. And I've been hearing in many Lutheran spaces for many years the lament that the church is dying. And I don't agree with that. I think the church is being actively killed by people's behavior, which we heard a little bit about this morning. And so I often teach by story too. And so, and like my sister Kelly, I've often been known as the quiet one in my family. And I need to tell you about my grandmother, Matilda Schumpert. I did not know until her funeral, this story came to me when you were talking about the water from birth. I did not know until her funeral that my grandmother was a midwife.
And that's important, especially in the Black community, right? Especially the Black community of a certain age where we weren't allowed in hospitals. Midwives knew the history, the story of a pregnant woman's family. They knew what needed to be done because they had birthed your mother. So they knew if you had narrow hips and something different needed to be done. My grandmother was always a truth teller, and she was not shy. I was often embarrassed. Never more so than the Sunday after my sister's graduation. We were down in Tennessee. We went to church with them. And it was a Mother's Day Sunday, and my grandmother got up at the end of service and told off everybody in the church, including the pastor, about themselves and the ways that they were doing wrong. And I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. And then I was like, well, I only come down once a year. Maybe they won't remember. I will tell you, not too long ago, I had a dream that I did the exact same thing in this church. Not this church, but I had a moment where I was tired of the nonsense that happens in white church, and that I got up at Calvary and told off the church. I have not done that, but there are days where I'm real close. So when I joined Calvary with my mother and my younger sister, I don't know, it was the mid-'70s, and we'd been going to church there for a number of months. And, you know, that was in the days of taking a picture with the Polaroid, putting it up on the new member bulletin board. And every Sunday, this same woman would come up to us and say, "It is so good that you visited us today." And I'd finally had enough of it as a kid, and I'm like, "Mom, doesn't she see our Polaroid? It's right over there." And my mom's just like, what I didn't know is that the pastor had spoken to my mom and 2 of the other Black mothers that had been coming to Calvary to let them know that he was moving on to a new call. But he wanted them to join the church because he knew that once he left, my mother and these 2 other mothers would be driven out of the church. Now, this same woman that was always welcoming me every Sunday was also the one who had, to Dr. Emerson's point, had the most difficulty in the early 90s when we finally removed the American flag from the other side of the altar. Right? So one of the goals of the ELCA is that we will meet 1 million new, young, and diverse people. One of those people is my nephew. Now, he gave unlike in days of old where everybody individually had to speak, right? He was chosen as the person to give the speech for his confirmation class. And he's 20 years old now, and rarely does he come back. I still remember the sermon from that Sunday, and their pastor talked about the BS meter that these kids have. It's a good meter. So the ELCA wants to meet 1 million new, young, and diverse people. Folks, they catch it when we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. We don't get to say we welcome you over here, but we're gonna kick you in the butt over here. And they're not here for it. So the person who talked about their young adult children are like, no thank you. We're actively killing the church with our behaviors. And so we know, sorry, this is part of how I pay attention. We do know what to do about the cultural change that's happening and not only in the church, or in the world, but in the church, because our Christian faith has prepared us for uncertainty. So, if we're reading our Bible, right, there are plenty of places of uncertainty. And yet we know who's leading us, and that's okay. So what I need for the white church to do is stop trying to hold on to sand. And so Kelly talked about y'all being good people. And so I'm making an assumption that you are here because you're an ally. So if you are white or believe yourself to be white, I believe that you are here because you want to be an ally. Though I personally have a problem with that word ally, because it's that last piece that Kelly talked about. Are you being empathetic or are you being empacentric? Empathetic or empacentric? And so I need you to be a partner. Partners have skin in the game. And so for the folks who are questioning why you would move to a place where Black and brown people are leading you, it's because that is not a comfortable place for you. It is just not. Let's just admit that right now. So Jim Bear earlier asked you to stop lying to yourselves. White people like to lead, right? It's normal, it's natural. That's how the world has been set up. I experienced that at work, right? A Black woman who is a direct communicator gets what title? Angry Black woman. Do I sound angry right now? Am I being direct right now? Did I hurt your feelings? Yep. She's being mean to me. Was she being mean to you or was she being direct? I'm not going to walk you around the block 15 times and then we're all going to walk out of here going, that was fantastic. I don't really know what happened, but it was great. Well, you might not want that either. I mean, you might want my Black mother, but you certainly don't want my Black grandmother, because that woman played, yeah, you would pick a switch, so. And you better pick a right one, because if she goes and picks one, it's not gonna go well for you. But seriously, to our white liberal progressives who think they're not like those people, I'm gonna need you to stop paying attention to what dead people want and what people need right now. So the adiaphora, let it go. Let it go. But let us together figure out what is important so that these million, at least for the ELCA, these million new young and diverse people that we're trying to engage with, we're doing so in an authentic and honest and Christ-led way. Thank you.
Thank you, my sisters. Thank you. Thank you, Jim Bear, and thank all of you. Thank you to Dr. Emerson. Sometimes there is a connecting point that you didn't know was even there. I was trolling Twitter the other day, and I saw a quote, and the quote just was so provocative, I just had to put it on my Facebook page. But it wasn't until Dr. Emerson's presentation that the quote had a life. It became more than provocative. It became, oh no. It's too real. That quote was, "There's no hate quite like Christian love." And when he was going through all of those findings, it just occurred to me that I don't know who the person was, but that quote just kept ringing out in my ears. I am a product of the black church. I am a son of a black Pentecostal preacher. I grew up in Indianola, Mississippi. And there's probably two things you need to know about Indianola, Mississippi. It is B.B. King's hometown, or the hometown that he claims from Mississippi. I actually grew up on B.B. King Road. And Indianola is also where the White Citizens Council was founded. And if you don't know what the White Citizens Council, I think you might, but take a look. In the 80s, when I was growing up, like I said, I was a product of the black church, so I didn't know much about white church, but I learned about white churches when I was 13. In Indianola, we were a town, again, even in the 80s, even to today, I think still today, a town divided black and white by a railroad track. And because of segregation, none of the white families in Indianola would ever go to public schools. And so all of the white children went to private academies, and most of the public schools were black. But our school superintendent and the majority of the school board were white. And so at the age of 13, the black community in Indianola, Mississippi, decided to protest that unequal control of the school board. And all of us were involved. As a matter of fact, parents kept their children from school. It became a real big story. The pressure was on. It was a real flashpoint in that town. But I learned that white churches read and interpret Scripture differently. That's when I learned it. Because there was a white teacher. Yes, we had white teachers in those schools. There was a white teacher whom I trusted, one of my favorite teachers. A bunch of us were talking before class with him about the protest, about the boycotts, and how we were going to prevail, and that we were going to show that we wanted leadership to reflect our community. And his response to me was, "Everything you're doing is wrong. It's against the Bible. My pastor told us on Sunday why you all are wrong." And I pushed a little bit. I also was a little bit of a bad kid. And I fought and argued with him. But that's when I learned that white churches read and interpret the Bible in ways that were indifferent, if not hostile, to black people. For many reasons, I didn't want to be a part of the church, but as I grew up and began to work in politics, I began to encounter evangelicals. They were always at the Capitol. They most often wanted to talk about abortion, but there were all kinds of issues that they wanted to talk about. But again, it was there that I would learn that the welfare of people of color, and specifically black people, never or hardly ever figured in any of their advocacy on any topic. Blackness just simply did not exist. And then I went to seminary. I went to seminary And I got introduced to the theologian James Cone. And then I began to go back into my thoughts and my history and my growing up. But I remember in 1988, James Cone wrote an essay expressing his anger about the silence of white theologians and white churches about the link between white supremacy and Christianity. He talked about Christianity's role in the crimes of slavery, colonialism, segregation, and lynching. And he called on white Christians to confront the truth about religious ideas, images, and metaphors that dominate Christianity, and reinforce what he says, quote, the moral right of white people to dominate people of color economically and politically. And it was a call to break the silence and articulate forcefully that just as Christianity was used to justify and promote slavery, colonialism, and segregation, that Christianity was and is playing a direct role in justifying the neglect and violence experienced by communities of color. That Christianity is playing a role in the criminalization of poverty and blackness. And certainly Christianity is playing roles in the maintenance of white supremacy in every facet of social life. And then I read another theologian, and this is where it started to mess me up a little bit. It began to make me wonder if I could even be a clergy person. Willie James Jennings, and I just want to quote it because I walk around with this quote, believe it or not. And it's the thing that wakes me up every morning, even as I struggle in prayer and in sermon preparation, in being in ministry with the members of my own church. He says, Christianity in the Western world lives and moves within a diseased social imagination. Christian theology now operates inside this diseased social imagination without the ability to discern how its intellectual and pedagogical performances reflect and fuel the problem, further crippling the communities it serves. So when Dr. Emerson went through the findings, I could only say that this is what a diseased social imagination creates. And so then I'm left with the question, and I keep wrestling with the question. I actually said it to my colleagues over lunch. I wrestle with it all the time. Everything that I try to be honest, I try to speak directly. Is Christianity the handmaid of colonialism and white supremacy? Or is colonialism and white supremacy the handmaid of Christianity? And that I don't know how to get myself out of that sticky wick is proof that we have here a diseased social imagination. So then now, what do diseases need? Diseases need some kind of treatment, some kind of medicine. And I don't mind telling you, because I think if I speak honestly, you'll pray for me. I am not hopeful. And here's why. As Dr. Emerson was presenting, it brought into sharp relief some things that I've seen over the years. Most recently, when the professors of some Southern Baptist seminaries rose up to take a public stand against critical race theory as incompatible with Baptist doctrine and theology, they were a living embodiment of what Dr. Emerson just presented. When Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock ran for the Senate in Georgia the first time, and even until this day, he came under attack, not for his ideology or his policy proposals. Fox News did not feature some of the, so as they would say, that leftist public policy stuff. No, they attacked his preaching, characterizing black theology and black religious expression as some kind of fringe alien threat to Christianity. And then when Dr. Emerson's findings is simply telling us something that's already showing up. It's already happening. This was a couple of years ago. And finally, again, right after the election, the 2020 election, when the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers all converged upon Washington, D.C., and it started to get violent in Washington, was it just by coincidence that they targeted two historically black churches in Washington, D.C.? The Asbury United Methodist Church and a Metropolitan African Methodist Episcopal Church, Frederick Douglass's church. Is it a coincidence that they chose those churches to attack and vandalize? At the time, I wondered, but after listening to Dr. Emerson, I'm convinced that Christianity exists within a diseased social imagination. I know what you're going to say. Hey, preacher, now, come on. You're supposed to give us good news. But I don't have good news, or the good news that I do have is that we're talking about it. But I'm going to sit down, as we go into an election on Tuesday, I want to talk about the implications of Dr. Emerson's findings on democracy. And I have been worrying and talking about this with members of my own church, raising the prospects of an abandonment of democracy by religious folk. I had a woman who has been visiting Plymouth Church. She's a former evangelical who has been rejected by her previous friends and churches because she sees that there is something wrong. I think she senses there's a diseased social imagination and she's trying to get out of it. And Dr. Emerson's work just made all this stuff come up. In his seminal work on a reviving American democracy, Cornel West asserts that the Jewish invention of the prophetic commitment to justice and that influence on Christianity and Islam has been one of the major traditions fueling democratic energy. Dr. Emerson just told us, though, that when you use the word social justice, the response of practicing white Christians is anger. Anger. Our democracy, on one hand, fueled by prophetic voices coming out saying the world needs to be changed, the world needs to be transformed, the world needs to be redeemed, the world needs to show God's love. And we now have practicing white Christians who do not want us to even talk that way. And so if that's what fueled democracy, What does a diseased social imagination fuel? Autocracy? I'm just talking off the top of my head. Look through the history. Look at what we have become, and I'll say we. And I hope that we in this room will find courage. We'll pray for courage. We find ways. I like what Dr. Emerson said at the end there, that maybe we have to leave those churches and go elsewhere. But understand that what we're dealing with, we're also dealing with what the theologian Miguel de la Torre called a flourishing mendacity, a kind of anti-intellectualism that refuses to know, because to know may require you to change or to give something up. Thank you.
We'll have a few minutes that we can take some questions. So I will again play Phil Donahue. That's a very dated reference. But most of you are laughing, so what does that say?
I just have a question because I was looking around the room and I just noticed I don't see too many young faces. There's a few. Thank you for being here. I feel like I'm young, but I'm almost 50 years old. If you can't tell, I'm very zealous for racial justice, but in my own church, I just feel like it's hard to reach that younger generation. A lot of people have left in my church, but even the ones that are still around, I mean, we did a book discussion on faithful anti-racism, and we got a few young people, but just wondering, I don't know how to reach the younger people, how to give them hope. And we need them. We need them in our churches to be the torchbearers. I'm not going to be doing it at 50. So I don't know. My question is, how do we get these younger people to get more involved? How do we? Because the people in this room, I'm glad we're all here, but a lot of them are older faces. So I wish there was a younger crowd here.
Well, I think one of the things is to not expect them to do what we're doing right now. Go where they are. And I don't think we need to give them hope. I think they're plenty hopeful. They're just not doing it here because, again, both sides of the mouth, right? So, or it's church, what I call fluff and buff church. And so, I've had a hard week. Don't trouble me on Sunday. And I'm like, I've had a hard, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm like, not just like I have a job, right? I have a home, I travel, I do these things. But I do it in this skin. And so I don't get a break. So when I come to church on Sunday, I want my pastor to be talking about something, and I don't want it to be fluff and buff church. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I think it's not expecting them to do what's been the status quo. And it's asking them what they want. Not, we've always done it this way, so now you have to come and sit in a pew for 4 hours and do the thing. That doesn't excite them.
And I would say I think the same, we have the same problem with youth that we have with white churches. Just as white people are unable to relinquish and let go and share or give away power, I think it's the same thing we do with young people. We want them to be there, but we don't want them to be there. We want to know that they're sitting there, but that's all we want to know.
All right. Other questions?
There's one over there, Jim.
Just as a comment to try to offer some hope for this situation. I think, and I'm very guilty of having been very naive. I think about our country and about our system, about our church. And if we have any hope for trying to manage this and trying to look at some positive outcome of the last previous administration and the issues that we've dealt with, is that it exposes things to a point where we might then at least identify them and make some movement to adjust. So I guess I would offer that as some sense of positivity, and I'm less naive than I used to be.
I do want to respond to that. So the reason I intentionally say that I am a minister of the gospel, and I do have an eschatological hope and belief. So you do know that. And I do preach that, and I do believe it. I do believe that in due time, God will do God's thing. But I'm also mindful of again, Miguel de la Torre's work, if you haven't read Hopelessness. And I take him at his word. Again, growing up in where I grew up, again, even in the mid '80s as a kid, there's a kind of hope that people want to hear that steals the fight. If you say it too much, or and in this context, I don't want us to think eschatologically. That's easy. That's a get out of here quickly kind of thing. And so I could have gotten preacherly on you, and I could talk about where my hope is, and the hope in this kind of work that the Minnesota Council of Churches is doing, and that my own church is doing, that continue to impress and surprise me. But I also don't want us to have that kind of hope that steals away our urgency or our complacency, or I say reinforces our complacency. Oh, it's gonna get by and by. It'll work. God's gonna do it. And again, I don't want to rely on what Dr. Emerson's findings are like. If we would just all accept Jesus, we just, you just. So when I tell people I don't have hope, I think I told my church I have discovered in the last year that it's probably not accurate to say that I am an optimist, but I'm also not a pessimist. So I'm just waking up every day, and I take what I get, and I try to do what I can with what's coming, and some days are harder than others.
There was something that you said, flourishing mendacity, a refusal to know. That to me is, that just describes whiteness. That just describes my own life. And that disease, social imagination, there has to be a diagnosis before there can be a treatment, and the patient has to accept that diagnosis. And one of the biggest lies of whiteness that I've come to understand is that I'm not a racist. I am a racist. I've been raised to be a racist. I've been conditioned in it. Every single day, I have to fight back against it because it is all around me. And the denial that it's all around me and within me is part of what keeps me from being healthy, from even beginning to claim my own humanity. That's where I find the hope, is that God keeps calling me, like that Road to Emmaus thing. You know, there's this burning inside of me, and if I turn away from it, I'm turning away from my own soul. Yeah. And when I listen to it and go through that fire, that's when there is hope. And it's not just hope in me, it's hope in God's work. That's the only way that I've ever seen anybody be able to make a change, is through God.
So, let's see, how do I say this? Glasses coming off. You know, and I'm hearing everyone, but you know, the one thing that I see, so I do a lot of speaking, and I do a lot of speaking and, you know, preaching at churches, different churches and things like that, is when I go, is that people are always shocked at the feedback that I give them, because I started giving some feedback, and it becomes really hurtful to the people that I go to visit. And for an example, we were just talking this about at lunch, and I said, ooh, this was in the spring. I was at a congregation, I preached, gave a forum, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, in front of my son, who is 10 years old, 9 at the time, and he said, so let me get this right. What I hear from you, and I even kind of gave the story of the water and that kind of stuff, but what I hear from you is that you believe indigenous people are the superior race. Oh, did I? I'm like, what the? And so I remember standing there trying to, how am I going to respond, especially as he continued to tell me how inferior I was, right? And then somebody else came up, you know, and started talking about their experience with indigenous people, and, or, you know, and it was, all these things were happening. But what I learned from that moment, and was this, and what I tell congregations now, is when I get asked to preach, when I get asked to come and I talk, or even in institutions, I always ask for someone to be with me so they can hear the crap that I go through on a consistent basis. Because just because you and maybe your racial justice group, you know, or maybe the people that show up to your forums, and you get this impression that your entire church is where you are. It is not. See, and it was a wake-up call for that congregation, because they didn't think that, they kind of thought that everybody thought the way this group did. And I would say a vast majority of them, they do, you know, they're doing some work, they're some social justice, racial justice work, and that is fantastic. But they didn't realize that the ones that don't show up are the ones that they've got to get into that. And it's the ones that don't show up to the stuff that they plan that makes themselves feel good because they hosted it, are the ones that come up to me to tell me these very racist things and expect me to help them understand. And so when you are going through this work, or when you are thinking about all of this, remember that you are just the few. You can't speak for your entire congregation. And that is part of that idea of causing some more trauma, is you're all wanting to do these great things, but you have some work to do with your own people. I think we've forgotten people have forgotten how to have those difficult conversations, right? So what are the tools and the resources that you need to have these difficult conversations with your own people, so that I'm not, or we're not the ones standing there helping you and having to have this until, you know, so that I don't have to come with a bodyguard every time I go preach somewhere, so I don't get disrespectful comments, right? And so.
I just want to add, you just made a wonderful point there, Kelly. That also says, I mean, again, Dr. Emerson's findings, I know we were shocked by some of those findings, but some people in your congregations are in the 2/3. If we do a generalization of it, or if that finding is robust in the way that he says, that those beliefs are being held in some of our progressive churches too. And that's exactly what I just want to make that connection that Kelly is talking about your churches. Dr. Emerson, we can sometimes take the objective observer posture and think, oh, look what they're doing. But I guarantee you we're surrounded by people who feel that way.
Oh, yes, we are. I mean, so people talked about Calvary, right? And how like we were there in the breach. Yes. And I know we got folks who fit into those findings because they've said it, right? Like, when are we going to stop talking about this crap? Because they want fluff and buff church.
Thank you. It was disturbing. You hurt my feelings. You made me want to argue with you. So, but I'm grateful too. I am very grateful for what was said here. And what I want to say is a challenge to my white brothers and sisters, that I think sometimes we hold the idea that racists are other, that they're very far away from us. But if we think about Thanksgiving's coming up, and we're going to be sitting there having awkward conversations or not conversing. And so what I want to throw out is just be aware and challenge each other and think about how close is this stuff to you, to me. My grandfather was in the White Citizens Council in Oklahoma City. I have slaveholding documents in my genealogy. So I'm very aware that this is very close to me. And so and I think it's also close to the rest of y'all too. If you dig and if you're open, you'll find out how close this stuff is and how much work we have to do. So thank you for challenging me. Thank you for hurting my feelings. I'm always grateful, even though I want to say I'm not like that. And yes, I have work to do and more to grow, so thank you.
And so we are focusing a lot on the individual here. I want to bring it up just a little bit to institutions and systems, because that's where we make change, actually, right? The one-to-one stuff does need to happen, but what are the systems at play in your congregations that are keeping racism in place? And doing a really honest deep dive at that, right? Because there's a continuum. There's explicit, institutional explicit, just like there's individual explicit. We tend to think of institutional explicit as those things that are now against the law, right? But it's happening. And then we have the institutional implicit, and that's our policies and practices and procedures that often work better for white people. It's often unintentional, but they do. Right? If we think about the seminary system, we could come back tomorrow and have a whole conversation about that. So what are the things? Bring it up and have an honest conversation about. So Sunday morning, what do we live by? The bulletin. Right? So if we are truly welcoming folks, do you have your bulletin in other languages? Do you sing your songs, call and response, or do you expect everybody to have a Lutheran choir background? Or, I'm speaking from my context, right? 4-part harmony, everybody knows the notes. So think about the ways you're doing church that are keeping racism in place in the places that you gather.
Friends, we have to draw this time to a close, so would you please join me in expressing your gratitude for Reverend Dr. DeWayne Davis, Felecia Boone, and Reverend Dr. Kelly Sherman-Conroy. So, there's a saying that is widely known amongst organizers and activists of color when we are addressing white allies. We say, I need you to come and get your cousins. So I'm bringing up one of your cousins. Would you please welcome Dr. Tanden Brekke.
Well, good afternoon. There are moments in your life when you know you're well in over your head. Right here. This stage is being graced today by some brilliant, beautiful, powerful speakers. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Now you have me. Thank you. I say Pam, but I need to say Reverend Ngunjiri and Reverend Jim Bear for the invitation. I'm extremely honored. I'm thankful for the ways that the two of you have invested in my life, journeyed with me, and helped me figure some of this stuff out. Some of it. So I come to you today as a Reverend Doctor who is a recovering racist, who's working his butt off, at least trying to work my butt off, to figure out how white supremacy, whiteness has shaped my life and has shaped our community. So I'm going to be talking today through that pastoral lens, and I'm going to be talking today to my white brothers and sisters in the room, okay? First of all, I just want to make this note that when we talk about whiteness and white supremacy, us white liberals like to say, yeah, but it's those bad white people over there, right? It's the uncles at Thanksgiving, it's the conservatives over there. And that's true, that our conservative brothers and sisters have work to do. But we need to own our own stuff, okay? So I just want us to take a deep breath in and realize that this phenomenon of finger pointing needs to stop. So my comments today are going to follow. When Jim Bear called me, I immediately, and he said, hey, here's what I need you to talk about, Tanden. Immediately thought of the James Baldwin quote that I have in my office. And so I want to start with that quote. And then I have three things that I want to share that that I think are important for us to think about as white people. So the James Baldwin quote, these innocent people, and when he says innocent people, he's referring to those of us who are labeled white. These innocent people are trapped in a history that they do not understand. And until they understand it, they cannot be released from it. Right? We are trapped. We are trapped. There's three ways I'm going to articulate that we're trapped. One, we're trapped in a state of dehumanization. Paulo Freire, the brilliant educator from Brazil, in his book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, makes a very important comment or point. He talks about systems of oppression dehumanizing those who are marginalized, right? And systems of oppression dehumanizing those who are privileged. Now, he makes a note, we're not dehumanized in the same ways, but we are all dehumanized. And those of us who are white, we need to see how white supremacy has dehumanized us. This is not just about, it's not about this white saviorism, right? We're not doing this to save other people. We're doing this because our own souls are on the line here. Our own humanity is being marred and ripped apart. We need to hold up the mirror and have a long, long gaze in the mirror. Not one of those gazes where you kind of look and then turn away real quick, right? But one of those gazes where we look into our souls, our collective souls as white folk. Who are we? Really? Who are we? How has this system dehumanized us? and have the courage to sit with it, have the courage to name it, have the courage to admit we've been dehumanized. Leila Watson, the great humanitarian and activist, says it this way: if you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. We got to let that quote move into us. Not just our heads, our bodies, our hearts, the ways in which we move in the world. This is not just about gaining knowledge. It's not about this white saviorism. It's about our own liberation, right? And we need to get explicit about that. That's one. Number two is that we are trapped, or the ways in which whiteness, I said whiteness here. I teach at Doherty Family College over at St. Thomas. And when I talk about these ideas, I don't usually use the religious language as much as I once did. So I'm going to try to start talking. When I say whiteness today and white supremacy, I'm including in that this ideas about the white Jesus, the white God, right? So white Jesus has trapped us in this state of dehumanization. White Jesus has also trapped us in places where we are separated from our cultures, right? This has been talked about a little bit today already, but when our people immigrated from our various countries to the United States, we made a deal with white supremacy. And the deal was, we will give up our cultures, we will give up our languages, we will give up our music, we will give up our clothing, we will give up our artwork, so that we can be part of the American white supremacy system. We did that. And it's cost us. It's cost us dearly. We are a lost people. A lost people, so much so we don't even know we're lost. We think this is our place. It's not. We are here in America, but our ancestors come from another place. Our cultures and our mythologies, our stories, our folklores, we're also removed from them. A few years ago, well, as I've been working in communities of color, one of the things that it was disturbing to me was the deep connection that activists and organizers in communities of color that were working for change had to their ancestors. And I'm like, who in the heck are my ancestors, right? We were in a beautiful gathering a few years ago, and Jim, it was at the university I was working at the time, and Jim Bear was part of the panel. And at the end, Jim Bear grabs the microphone like he typically does and says some really beautiful things. And this time, this is the way Jim Bear said it. He looked at the whole crowd, he looked me in the eyes, he looked at those of us in the panel in the eyes and said, "Who are your people? You need to find your people. You need to know your stories." Right? As we know our cultures, as we know our people, as we know where we've come from, we can then identify our place in this world. And out of that place, know what it means to work in solidarity. What does it mean then to work from that place of being located into those ways of knowing, right? I've lost track of time here. So Jim Bear, you're going to need to tell me when I need to be done. But a few years ago, the university I was working at sent me on a trip to Lithuania to be part of an academic conference there. And I realized that if I redirected the flight, I could have the flight land and I could spend a day or two in Norway. I'm Brekke. Brekke's Norwegian. And I thought, wow, this could be a beautiful, beautiful time for me. So, I don't share this public very often because it's still kind of bubbling inside of me. This is over 10 years ago. I got off the plane, I beelined it to the closest piece of dirt that I could find. And I got down on my hands and knees, and I grabbed that dirt, and I felt the dirt. Later that day, I was in the middle of the town, in the middle of Oslo, at this beautiful sculpture garden that celebrates all kinds of depictions of life, right? And I looked through, there was a sculpture that's called the Circle of Life. And I looked through the circle, and just beyond the circle was a cemetery. I'm a pastor. God has very rarely ever spoken to me, right? I don't know if that makes me a good pastor or not, but that's the truth. That moment, I felt God's Spirit. She was speaking to me and saying, go to that cemetery. So I did. And I just walked through the cemetery, and I found a grave marker that said, Brekke's family grave. Whew. I'm still unpacking what that all has meant for me. But I can tell you what it's meant for me is that it's connecting me in this world in ways that white supremacy, whiteness, the white Jesus have stolen from me. And I'm complicit in that, okay? I'm not trying to say I'm passive. No, I've given away my people. Us white people, we've given away some of that. But it's time to retrieve it. It's trying to do the hard work of retrieving so that we can honestly live in this world in ways that are healthy and whole. The last thing I'm going to say is what the white Jesus does for us is the white Jesus, white religion puts us in little boxes. Little boxes. Pete Seeger, every once in a while, when I need a little bit of good energy, I put on a Pete Seeger song. I don't think Pete wrote this song, but he sings it. It's called Little Boxes. And he basically critiques American white supremacy, American capitalism. And basically says, it's all about putting us into these little boxes and producing us into these little shapes and that trap us in, right? Our churches, our white churches are little boxes. Our white seminaries, our white religion, it's a little box. It's a very, very little box. A few years ago, my son and I was actually working with Curtis DeYoung at the time, and we were doing some interfaith work here in St. Paul. And the university that him and I were working at, we were collaborating with a mosque and we brought some students to an iftar dinner. And I was able to bring my son, Micah. He's a junior in high school now, junior in college. And, but at the time, he was just a little guy. I think he was like in elementary school. And so we went to the iftar dinner. And then afterwards, we got in the car. I said, Micah, what do you think? Right? And he just responds by saying, Dad, the world's a really big place. It's a really big place. My heart just exploded in that moment, right? That's not the world that I've lived in, right? My Christianity said, don't go there. Don't eat with those people. Don't visit those people. Don't befriend them. Or if you do, here's how you do it, right? And when I say white Christianity, I've been in part of white Christianity for a long, long time, okay? I've been in a lot of church services, parts of lots of different churches. We're way too small. We need to have the courage to follow God's Spirit in her wild, wild ways that take us to new places, that do what we've heard today, right? That doesn't just keep us trapped in our minds, that allows us to go and participate with churches and communities and organizations and people that are doing beautiful work. We got to get out of our boxes. When our white religion says no, we need to say yes. So that's what I leave you with today. That the white Jesus has trapped us in a state of dehumanization. It has separated us from our cultures, and the white Jesus traps us in boxes. James Cone has been quoted today. There's many other theologians that have been quoted today that are outside of that white Jesus box. Please read those theologians. Please embrace and engage with the beautiful, diverse world that you live in. And as you do, I think you will find your soul expanding, your heart expanding. I just want to say that we need I don't get to talk to a bunch of white people very often. Please, let's do it. Okay? This is serious business. And we need to get on not just talking, but actually taking some action. That's all I got.
Okay, I'll do it. Woo! I am full of joy because we've heard truth and you stayed. You stayed. So I want to say thank you. I'm wrapping it up. I'm doing the closing. Thank you so much to Westminster for allowing us to be here, for your staff participating and working with us to bring this about today. Thank you to all of our participants, our keynote speaker, Dr. Emerson, our panelists, response panelists, Dr. Tanden, to our musicians, only one is left. That's okay. But most of all to you folks. Somebody asked me, did I have any hope? And I am an optimist. I am. But there are some days I can't find it, but today, optimism is alive and well. And I thank you for doing that for me today. Okay, so the cleanup stuff. In your bag is a survey. It's inside your program book. Would you please fill that out, and we'll have some baskets where you can drop them. It helps us in our planning for our future events, and there will be more. Also, your name badges, there will be a place where you can drop off your name badges so that we can use them again. What am I forgetting? Okay. Okay. So Jim Bear's going to come up and do closing comments. And then Patricia Lacy will sing our last closing song. Oh, never mind. Patricia's going to come up and sing her last song, and it's entitled, I'm Free, because I'm hoping that that's what has happened here today. And then Jim Bear will close. Thank you.
This song is from an album that I was blessed to do at the age of 59. I'm 63 next month. But, of course, the pandemic came and shut the world down, so it shut my dreams of getting on a tour bus and traveling all over the place. It'll come. I'm not worried. But while I was writing some of these songs on this project, that first one, my producer and I had spent 12 hours recording a different song. And he said, well, let's go home and take a short nap and shower and change and get some breakfast and come back and do the next song. And I thought it was going to be the one that I did earlier. And I'm like, oh, Lord. And then he said, well, this is the song we're going to do. I'm like, it was something different. And then I didn't have this song finished. And I'm like, okay, God, I had a Ring doorbell on my mother's house that had gone crazy, and I'm trying to fix it, and I'm sitting out there on a little step stool going like this, falling asleep. And I said, okay, you better go to sleep because he's going to expect you to have the song ready. And I just said, okay, I sat on the edge of the bed and said, God, I don't have the rest of the song. Could you please give it to me before I go to sleep so I can wake up and know what I'm doing in the studio this evening? Every time I tried to doze off, more verses came. So that's how I got that one. This song, I'm Free, is a song about me and people's lives in general. Sometimes you have dreams and aspirations of doing things like I've been singing for people all my life. My mother, Thelma Buckner, and the Minnesota Gospel Twins, who frequent many Lutheran churches while I was young growing up. So I grew up in a white church too. And then Sounds of Blackness came along, and then from there came Luther Vandross. And then I decided, well, I want to build a studio. My mother, who was the pastor at the time, I said, Mom, can I have some space in the church to build a studio? He said, knock yourself out. So I took 6 months and got the whole basement organized, cleaned up, and everything before I put the first stitch of paint on the wall in my studio. And I finally got the opportunity to do this project, and then now the project is dead in the water because the pandemic came and I'm shut down. I think that was a good thing, though, because my mother, who was sick with congestive heart failure, took a turn for the worse right before her 87th birthday. And we just prayed and prayed and prayed that she got to her 88th, and she did. And then it was, okay, let's pray and pray, God, can she get to her 8th or 9th, which she did. But I decided no way on this earth was she checking into anybody else's nursing facility but her own home. And I had told her that some years before. I said, Mom, you don't have to worry about your kids putting you in a nursing facility. It's not going to happen. As long as I'm breathing, not going to happen. And I refused to let my siblings talk me into. I said, nope, she got this big old house. Her living room is now her bedroom. Guys, get out of here. And I did that. So I was really pleased that I was able to do that. Not much help from folks sometimes, but I stuck it through. She kept saying, are you going to be there with me to the end? Absolutely. You were there with me. Why wouldn't I be here for you? So this song, Free, is like, sometimes you feel that pressure of the world on you, and these people got their feet on you, holding you down, and you just don't seem like you're going to get back up again. But we do, and we shall, and we will. How can you be saved if you don't believe? He said he's coming back for you and me. See, long ago he died on Calvary just to set me free. Now I'm free indeed, free from all the things that held me down when I couldn't get up off the ground. You came along and turned my life around. Because you rose again, I can wear a crown. Worry free from sin, the heavy burden that lies within. The weight is off me now, I'm free, thank God I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I am free.
I am free from your shackles, free from your hatred, free from your racism. That's what I need. No matter what they try to tell me, my God is the answer. Praise like a dancer. That's why
You broke the shackles off my feet and gave me strength that I might see the river Jordan at the end of this journey. I've been led out of the desert, walked through the Red Sea. 1,000 years whips on my back, my blood on the sand and on the cotton field. Free from worry, free from sin, the heavy burden that lies within. The weight is off me now, I'm free, thank God I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I am free.
I am blind to the world and they problems. No matter what they do, bro, they rarely ever solve them. I march to my own beat, I drum and guitar them. God is the drum major, he leads where I'm charging. Go. Now
Let me get into specifics. Let me tell you how my God is glamoristic and terrific. I overcome by holy water with no Pacific. I'm free from all that drama and all that sinning and all that ain't picking. It doesn't bother me. I'm moving focused on my winning. I'm trying to climb the mountain, get my message through the pit. Seen his whole life from beginning and the ending. I know the ending. Free me from. He free me from. Oh, I am free. I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I am free. I'm free from worry, free from sin. The heavy burden that lies within. The weight is off me now. I'm free. Thank God I'm free. I am free. I am free. I am free. I am free. Free, free. I am free. I am free. I am free. I am free. Oh. I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. I am free, free, free. I'm free. I am free. I am free. I am free. I'm free. I am free. I am free. Thank you.
So when you're the organizer and planner, you always get the last word. And that is good for this old Pentecostal minister's heart. Been a question that was brought into the space. It's been nagging me. It's been eating at me. This religion of whiteness. It's so easy to point at those white Christians over there. The Baptists, the Pentecostals, the free churches, the evangelical churches. How does it show up in good, liberal, progressive, white churches? Let me tell you, I have been in most of the good, liberal, progressive white churches that are represented in this room. If you attend a church that's good, progressive, liberal, and white, chances are I've been there, preaching, teaching. There is one question that arises more than any other question I ever get asked. I'm preaching at a good, liberal, progressive church tomorrow. I know I'll get asked this question. Jim Bear, given the history of abuse and harm and trauma visited upon indigenous people by the Christian church, how do you reconcile your faith? Every time I preach somewhere, I have to justify my faith. Now that's an obvious question, right? I mean, that's a question. Some of you in the room are hoping I answer that question right now. Let me ask you this. How many of you have Irish ancestry? Yeah. The Imperial Church visited harm and trauma upon your ancestors just as badly as it visited upon my ancestors. How many of you Irish ancestors, with Irish ancestry, have ever had to justify your faith? No, you haven't. How many of you have Nordic ancestry? Every hand in the room ought to go up here. Let's not forget where we are. The imperial church brought harm and trauma to your ancestors long before it ever came to mine. How many of you have ever had to justify your faith? None. Well, today, this afternoon, you're going to have to justify it. So here's the question I am sending you out of this room with. White Christians, since we know that whiteness has already cost you your ancestors. You're not Italian, you're not Irish, you're not Swedish, you're white. Cost you your ancestors. Since we know that whiteness has already cost you your ancestors, and we know that the adherence to a religion of whiteness is undeniably harmful and damaging, how do you reconcile your faith? As you consider that, as you wrestle with the same question now that I, honest to God, answer probably 6 times a month. Given the harm, given the trauma that has been for generations, now that you know, how do you justify, how do you reconcile your faith in this religion of whiteness? And if you can't come up with a good answer, then it's time to leave the religion of whiteness. And it's time to go sit under the preaching of Dr. DeWayne Davis, Dr. Kelly Sherman-Conroy, or Reverend Pamela Ngunjiri. As one of the medicines that Dr. Emerson prescribed is to sit intentionally under the leadership of people of color and sit in your discomfort. If you recognize your adherence to a religion of whiteness, you recognize its harm, you cannot reconcile your faith to that. You know you can't get your community to move in that direction. Leave the church. Let it die. There are pastors of color all over this place that you can humbly sit under their leadership and receive your healing. May it be so. May it always be so. With that, again, our deepest gratitude and thanks. As you exit our space, there will be, as Reverend Pam said, there will be baskets to collect your name tags, to collect your surveys. We thank you so much. This event has been recorded and will be made available within the next several days through the Minnesota Council of Churches website. I know that some of you are probably excited to share what you've experienced today with those who were not here. We intentionally did not live stream this event because, quite frankly, 75% of you would just show up online rather than in person. And I like speaking to people, like actual real people. So again, thank you very much. God bless. Have a wonderful weekend.